All right, looks like it's working. Pull this up. Well, hello everyone. As folks, it looks like we probably have everyone at 10:01. My name is Jack Evasision. I work with Project Awaken. Most of you, I'm sure, have already seen my face and heard my voice because you've probably watched some stuff from iLearn. But I am here in your 1020 class today so that we can have some discussions, because if you're just clicking through iLearn, it can kind of get repetitive of just watching videos, and it's not really the best way to learn to just watch videos without actually engaging and having a spot to ask questions and to talk about things. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to use this thing called Pear Deck, which helps so that today can be more interactive, but it makes it so that you all don't have to talk, because I know a lot of students hate coming off of mute. And so this way, when we have questions and stuff, you can type in your answers. So go ahead and go to Join PD, Pear Deck, joinpd.com, and you'll type in this code, and that will connect you. So I'll be able to see that students are connected, and it will give you an animal, and that will be like your screen name. That way other students don't know what you're saying, but we can still kind of have a class discussion without having our names attached to it. Okay. So we'll wait for some folks. You can also do this on your cell phone. So cell phone, computer, whatever's easier for you is totally fine. All right, 14. All right, and I want to pull up the chat at the same time. We got 22 folks now. All right, there we go. If for some reason you're more comfortable using the chat as opposed to this, you're also welcome to either come off mute or to put stuff in Zoom's chat, either way. But since we have most people connected, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll put the link in here so that if anyone joins us after the fact, they can still connect and join with us. Okay. So you probably already have heard from those iLearn classes, but Project Awaken is a grant-funded office at Tennessee Tech. We have a grant from the Office of Violence Against Women. All we do all day long, every day, is talk about sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. That's it. And so most of what Project Awaken does is educational programs, because most people come to Tennessee Tech without ever really having conversations about what these things are and the fact that they happen and what we can all do to help prevent them from happening and support people who have already been through them. So we do a lot of educational programs. We also usually do a lot of awareness events so that there's different things on campus to kind of bring this to people's attention so that we all can be a part of the solution. Those, of course, everything looks different this year, but of course, awareness events are looking really different because they're usually big scale events. And of course, it's not usually the best idea to have a ton of people all in one place right now. So, and then my favorite thing that Project Awaken does is we are a confidential resource for folks. So if you or a loved one has experienced sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking, and you are just not sure what to do, you don't know how to help, you don't know what resources, you don't know what on earth to do, everyone who works in the Project Awaken office is a confidential resource. So you can come and talk to us and get support, get resources, have a listening ear to kind of figure out what steps are options for you. And we don't have to tell anyone. So we're kind of like Vegas. What happens at Project Awaken stays at Project Awaken. Now, there are 3 exceptions for us and frankly for any confidential resource that you'll ever come across. We can keep every single thing that's told to us a secret unless I know you're going to hurt yourself or somebody else. If I know that child abuse or vulnerable adult abuse is happening. And vulnerable adult is often like if we've got somebody who's in a senior home, maybe with dementia or something like that, or an adult with a disability that impacts their functioning and they have to have a legal guardian, someone who the state would deem as unable to care for themselves. If I know of abuse for those populations, I have to call the police and report that. And then the last time where I have to break the secret is if I were to get a court order from a judge. Now, my entire career doing this, I have never once had that happen, but it still could happen. Otherwise, everything that's said to Project Awaken is kept private. private. So if throughout your time here at Tech you have questions, you have concerns, the nice thing is you can come to us without us having to report it. We don't have to call your parents, we don't have to tell your professors, we don't have to tell your RAs or your hall directors. We can keep everything secret, okay? So Project Awaken, all we do, like I said, is talk about sexual assault, stalking, and domestic and dating violence. Now we use the term power-based violence to kind of encompass all of these things. In the past, we used to use the term sexual violence, but some people started thinking of like stalking as a form of sexual violence. So we've switched our terminology a bit. So whenever throughout this training, whenever we say the words power-based violence, we could be talking about sexual assault, domestic violence, dating violence, or stalking. It's just really annoying to have to say those things again and again and again. So even though these experiences are really different, they're all lumped into this same umbrella term of power-based violence because they have two important things in common. They are all about power and they are all about control. So it's not about sex. It's not, oh my gosh, I love you so much, I just want to know where you are every minute of every day. It's, I think I have power over you. I think I have a right to control you. So it's power-based. The motivation to commit these crimes is for power and control over another human, okay? So a lot of times when I'd be in classrooms, especially last fall, we would say, I'd be like, does everyone know what sexual assault is? And everyone's like, yeah, I know what that is. But then when it comes time to actually defining it, we usually have a really hard time actually putting a definition together. So that's what we're going to practice doing. So the first one is, how would you all define sexual assault? It doesn't need to be a formal or fancy definition, but if your friend or family member came to you and asked you what sexual assault is, type back what you would do to explain it. How would you explain what sexual assault is? And then after we've given folks a second, I can show some of the answers. How would you define sexual assault? Okay. Even if you're still typing, take your time. If you're on your phone, you're gonna have to type on the bottom of the screen. Okay, so let's look. Panda says any sexual touch or pressure, it's unwanted. Yes, I'm glad that they brought up pressure. We'll come back to that, about talking about pressure and coercion. Ladybug did a good job of talking about whether or not there's penetration, there could be sexual assault. That's a huge thing. A lot of times people think that sexual assault is only rape. It's only that unwanted penetration, but it actually can be a broader term than that. Lie in any unwanted or non-consensual physical contact, absolutely. So it's happening without consent. It's unwanted. A lot of you all are talking about it's unwanted, it's unwanted, it's unwanted. Absolutely. So a lot of people are saying sexual attention. So one thing I want to make a difference between, there's a difference between sexual assault and sexual harassment. So sexual assault by definition has to be physical, okay? So it is physically touching somebody else. Sexual harassment, on the other hand, is a much more broad term. So sexual harassment, it could be verbal. It could be you're catcalling at somebody, you're making comments about their body, you're hooting and hollering at them. Sexual harassment could be you are excessively asking somebody out, like you are asking them out every day for multiple weeks in a row. You're like really pushing them. But sexual harassment, it could even be that you're staring at parts of people's bodies. It could be that you are touching them in a non-private area. So like you're rubbing their shoulder or you're touching their hair without their permission. So the definition of sexual harassment is unwanted attention, so it has to be unwanted, of a sexual nature that makes the person who's receiving it feel uncomfortable. So even if you didn't intend to make them feel uncomfortable, if they feel uncomfortable, that could be sexual harassment, okay? So you all did a really good job with this sexual assault definition though, talking about different forms of it, how it makes people feel uncomfortable, how it's unwanted, absolutely. So let's look at the definition that we use at Awaken. So the Awaken definition that we use is a two-part definition. So the first part of that definition is that sexual assault is any unwanted touching to a private area. And of course, the private areas are breast, butt, and genitals, okay? But like we talked about, some of you did a really good job typing in, sexual assault is not just unwanted touching. It also could be unwanted penetration. So it's kind of an and or situation. It could be everything on the screen, or it could be just one of these things on the screen, and that is still sexual assault. So with sexual assault, that unwanted penetration could happen orally, anally, vaginally, or with an object. And so this is usually the point when we're in person in classrooms that students are visibly look like they want to vomit. They're so uncomfortable, they're squirming, and they're like, oh my gosh, why did they invite this crazy lady into our classroom who's talking about penetration in my 1020 class? Makes people super uncomfortable, right? The reason that we talk about it is because I've worked with so many sexual assault survivors who did not even realize that they were sexually assaulted because they didn't know that all of these things counted. They didn't know that if they'd been forced to perform oral sex, that is sexual assault. They didn't know that if they'd been forced to have anal sex, that is sexual assault. Okay, so this is so that we're all on the same page, that any unwanted sexual touching or unwanted penetration is sexual assault. Okay? So a couple things that are important to talk about when it comes to sex is if someone's going to choose to have sex, we don't want to have sexual assault, right? We want everyone to be choosing to have sex. So you have to have consent. So if you all were going to, in one word, tell me what consent is, draw that one word. If consent had a one-word definition, what would the one word be? And it'll let you actually draw your response. Seeing lots of people writing, very impressive handwriting for having to write in this format. And for being engineers, I have to tease you. My dad's an engineer, and a lot of times the stereotype might hold true that the handwriting can be a little wonky, but I'm impressed. Y'all are trying to shred that stereotype. So look at this. We've got a thumbs up. People saying yes, they're wanted, it's desire, it's permission. So overall, it's people saying, I'm cool with this, I'm comfortable with this. I'm saying yes, right? And so with consent, a couple things to be mindful of. You need consent every time for the whole time. So it doesn't matter if you have had sex with somebody 50 times before, you still need consent every single time, okay? And that consent needs to be specific. So if somebody says yes to having sex with a condom, and then halfway through, the other person removes that condom, well, the person didn't say yes to having sex without a condom, right? They didn't give consent to that specific interaction. And so that would be sexual assault if they weren't cool with that, right? So this is why we need consent for every single thing. It needs to be like this ongoing discussion the whole time through, okay? I love it. This is why I prefer to type my essays. Yeah, absolutely, right? Because this handwriting can be a really big struggle for folks, but I'm impressed. Y'all did a really good job with your handwriting there. A couple other things with consent. In the state of Tennessee, well, in every state, there's a legal age of consent. So it's how old you have to be to give your consent. So another writing thing, go ahead and write, what age do y'all think, or do you remember, how old do you have to be to give your consent in Tennessee? Or you can type it if you are like your classmate who hates having to handwrite things and would rather type. Nicely done. So lots of folks are writing 18, absolutely. So 18 is the legal age of consent in Tennessee. But we have what's called a Romeo and Juliet law, or an age exemption. So what this means is if everybody's 14 or older and within 4 years of each other's age, 2 minors could legally have sex, okay? So if a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old, they're both within 4 years of each other's age, if they both were cool with something, comfortable with something, they could choose to give their consent to each other. These laws are to protect an adult from preying on a minor and hurting them. So it's really to prevent statutory rape, which is where someone is older than the other person and they're outside of that age range. So yep, absolutely, you guys are totally right. The age of consent is 18, but there are some exceptions for minors who are at least 14 or older having sex with someone who's within 4 years of their age, okay? So the other thing about consent is a lot of times what I'll hear of is somebody being coerced into giving their consent. So the way I like to describe coercion is, I don't know if any of you, when you were younger, or maybe you know a kiddo who, if you were to go out to eat, at the end of the meal, they take everything left on the table and they mix it all together. So they mix the leftover milk, the soda, the ketchup, the creamer on the table, some sugar. They mix up this disgusting concoction And then what do they try to do? They try to get somebody else to drink it, right? So the ways they try to get somebody to drink that disgusting mixture they made is they coerce them, they pressure them. They say things like, oh, come on, don't be a scaredy cat, or let's be real, they say no balls, right? They say, I'll give you $10. They say, I triple dog dare you. When I was a kid, I remember if you got triple dog dared to do something, you had to do it. It was like public shame if you didn't, right? All of those statements, those are examples of coercion. And if they're used when it comes to sex, if somebody says something like, oh, come on, we've done it before, what's the big deal? Or if you really loved me, you would do this. If you're pressuring or forcing somebody to give their consent, that is not consent. Someone saying yes because no isn't a safe answer is not consent, okay? So we need to make sure we're having good, clear, yes, informed consent rather than that coercion. The last thing with consent is somebody cannot legally give their consent if they're incapacitated. And so the law defines incapacitated as someone being unconscious or completely like incapacitated due to drugs or alcohol. So the way I've had a lot of students ask, like, well, how do you know if someone's too drunk to give consent? Kind of a gray area, right? Because not like you usually have like a blood alcohol test on you that you can like, are you above the legal limit? One thing I'd say is if someone's not sober enough to drive, they're definitely not sober enough to give their consent to sex. If they're slurring their words, if they're stumbling and having trouble walking, they are not clear-minded and sober to give that consent or permission. And so if you're not sure if someone's sober enough to give consent, don't have sex with them. Like, that is not worth that risk. Get them water, food, ibuprofen, see if they want to have sex when they're sober, okay? So I've gotten a great question, and it's, what about if someone dating as minors, but one turns into an adult and the other is still a minor? So the law has no problem with folks dating each other. The law only has issue once it comes to sex. So let's say we had a 17-year-old and an 18-year-old who are both 17, they're dating, they're having sex, they're in a relationship. The law has no problem. Now one turns 18. So now one is an adult and one is a minor. So now, even though they're within 4 years of each other's age, one's an adult and one's a minor. So in some states, that could still be statutory rape. So in that circumstance, technically, it could be statutory rape for them to have sex with each other, right? Because one's an adult and one's a minor. So legally, they should wait now until the 17-year-old is 18, and then the law has no problem with it again. But in reality, the only kind, like, so for the police to get somebody in trouble, it has to be reported, right? So if, how it actually usually works is if it got reported to the police, then that 18-year-old could be charged with statutory rape. You don't usually see cases like that go forward though, because they would need to be a complainant going and reporting it. Where I have seen a case like that go forward is, I'm from Michigan, and I have seen where an 18-year-old has been charged with statutory rape for having sex with a minor who they were dating in a relationship with because the minor's parents weren't cool with it and were reporting it. So this is some of that yucky gray area where when it comes to sex, it's really important that you trust the person you're having sex with and that you trust that they are cool with it. And if they're a minor, I mean, honestly, you want their family to be cool with it too, because that family member could still go report it. And depending on the jurisdiction, I have seen folks charged with statutory rape. So my job as an advocate is to tell you the good, the bad, the ugly, and that's some of the bad and the ugly, right? Okay, I think we covered all the things I needed us to with sexual assault. So what about dating and domestic violence? Same thing. If you had to define that to a friend or family member, it doesn't have to be formal or fancy, but how would you explain to them what this is? If your friend was like, I think I'm in an abusive relationship, but I don't know, how would you help them define what an abusive relationship is? Okay, even if you're still typing, that's totally fine. I'm gonna go ahead and pull up what folks are saying though. Okay. And y'all should be able to see the responses on the screen. Now, can someone just send in the chat real quick and let me know, can you see the responses of other classmates on your screen? Yes, thank you so much. Okay, so Ladybug, it's abuse that could be mental or physical. It could be as bad as to make the person feel depressed. The victim or survivor might start to feel depressed, might even start self-harming, absolutely. Ostrich is overly controlling. It's manipulating to have power and control over another person. Absolutely. Having control over someone, hurting someone on purpose. Y'all are doing a great job. Yeah, these are exactly examples of domestic or dating violence. So this is not love, right? This is like, I think I own you or have control over you. Absolutely. So something that I'm seeing a lot of people do a really good job talking about in this class is you're not all just saying it's physical violence. A lot of times people think that domestic violence is only physical violence, but it's not, right? It's controlling the other person, and it could be domestic or dating violence, even if there has never been physical abuse. So the definition we use with Project Awaken, the underlined parts here are what's super important. So it's a pattern of abusive behaviors. So it has to happen more than once, okay? It's this ongoing thing. It's perpetrated by one partner, and it's all about maintaining power and control. So it's not we're in an unhealthy relationship and we don't trust each other and we both are kind of back and forth mean to each other. It's one person has all of the power and control, makes all the decisions. One person is the abuser and the other person is being victimized, okay? So something that we'll use a lot when I'm working with someone who's been in an abusive relationship is something called the power and control wheel. So I'm going to warn you, when I Google it, a lot of times they'll use pronouns like male and female pronouns in the wheel, which I'm not a big fan of because I think it makes it sound like some people are always the abuser and some people are always the victim, and that's just not true. So I'm warning you that you'll probably see pronouns. Doesn't mean that they're right. But something that I love to use with folks who've been in abusive relationships is this wheel. Because I've had a lot of people say, well, my partner doesn't hit me. They're not like abusive, but they won't let me talk to my friends. Or they call me bad names, okay? And so sometimes we'll use this wheel and we'll say, I'm wondering if any of the things on this wheel resonate with you. And so they'll read through the wheel and they sometimes might start identifying multiple things that they've experienced on this power and control wheel. And so even if you just have one piece of this wheel, it could be an abusive relationship, right? So there's all different types of abuse like you all were talking about. There's emotional abuse, there's verbal abuse. Of course, there is that physical abuse, purposely putting hands on and hurting your partner. Something I'll see all the time though at the college level is academic abuse. So I've worked with, for example, I worked last spring with somebody who really wanted to go to graduate school, and their abusive partner was interfering with their grad school applications because they did not want them to go away and leave Cookville and leave. So they were purposely interfering with their applications. I've worked with other survivors whose abusive partners have deleted papers off their laptop or purposely sabotaged them, get in a huge fight with them right before an exam, keep them up all night the night before a big exam, all of these things to try to sabotage their academic career and have more power and control over them. Another big thing that we'll see in domestic violence relationships is financial abuse. So one partner having all of the control over the finances, which makes it really hard for that person to leave because you guys know, I mean, college is expensive, life is expensive. And so if you don't have any access to the family funds, it makes it really hard to leave that person who's hurting you, okay? Let's see. I've got a question here, and we're kind of circling back to consent with this question, but it's saying the legal limit for the people under the age of 21 in terms of your blood alcohol content is 0.02 in the state of Tennessee. So this is very easy to pass without looking or feeling intoxicated. Absolutely. So this is a good point, right? The legal limit for driving is 0.08, but if you're under 21, you're not supposed to have any alcohol in your system. I'll get questions a lot, but you can have that 0.02, and that's usually because of they want to make like religious, in case someone had something with their religion or anything. So what are the steps to take to avoid backlash? So, I mean, honestly, if you're genuinely worried, like, I don't know if this person is intoxicated and if they can give their consent to having sex, the safer answer is always to not, right? Like, you can't take it back after. And so if you're worried, I don't know if they're sober enough for this, don't do it. But the other thing I'd say is what I see come and get reported after the fact is not I had one drink and we had sex. It's I'll see all the time where somebody will purposely get somebody else so smashed that that person doesn't know their name, they're having trouble walking, they're slurring their speech. They purposely get somebody so intoxicated that they can take advantage of them. That's what I see pretty often, that someone will like use alcohol like a weapon to inebriate someone so that they're easy to manipulate. It's not very often that you see those scenarios of where maybe one person had a couple drinks but they weren't like out of control. They weren't purposely using alcohol like a weapon to try to get that person in a vulnerable situation. So it's one of those scenarios, if you're truly not sure, probably best to not. But what I'm most often will see when I'm working with sexual assault survivors is like a predatory response where they used alcohol to prey on someone else, to hurt somebody else, okay? Lots of gray area though, right? Okay, what about with stalking? Again, if you had to define stalking to a friend, a family member, how would you go ahead and define what stalking is? And again, I see that not all the folks are in or have responded. If you've had trouble getting connected, that link is still in the chat. So it's joinpd.com and our code is still in the chat and it's at the top right of the screen. Okay, lots of folks have responded though. Let's see. Constant pressure, making somebody feel uncomfortable, constantly tracking someone's whereabouts. Absolutely, it's unwanted harassment. You're going out of your way to follow or watch someone. You're following someone around. Good job, Hawk. They talked about you might be physically following someone around, or you might be virtually following someone and tracking someone. Absolutely. So y'all did a good job talking about stalking. The definition that our policy uses at Tennessee Tech, so you would have had to read these policies for that course online, but this will look familiar. The policy definition is on the screen. I don't love it because it's long, but it's a willful course of conduct, which means it's happening on purpose. The person is purposely doing this, involving repeated or continuing harassment. So by definition, it has to happen more than once. It's repeated. And it's of another individual that would cause a reasonable person to feel terrorized, frightened, intimidated, threatened, harassed, or molested, and it actually causes the victim to feel that way. So the part that's super important in this definition, and it's bolded and underlined on your screen, is that reasonable person. So with stalking, we have to meet what's called the reasonable person standard. And the reasonable person standard is that when you report it, the people who investigate it have to decide if the conduct you're reporting would make a reasonable person feel uncomfortable, okay? So for example, if I were to call your Professor Will one time, Will might be uncomfortable. He might be like, why is Jack calling me? This is weird. How'd she even get my cell phone number? It's super weird, right? But a reasonable person might be like, you know what, Jack and Will, they work at the same university. Maybe she has a reason to call Will. They get along pretty well. There might be a reason for it, right? But if I started calling Will every day, 20 times a day for the next 2 weeks, then he might be like, okay, this is excessive. A reasonable person would probably say that that's excessive. Something's going on. This is stalking, right? Jack doesn't have a reason to be contacting and harassing this individual to this extent, okay? So a lot of times something I'll do with folks who are being stalked who come to me for help is we'll make what's called a contact log. And a contact log or an unwanted contact log is where we keep track of all the times that the person is showing up, contacting you, messaging you on social media, messaging your friends and your family trying to get access to you. We'll keep a list. And what we'll do is we'll keep track of the date, the time, what happened, and anybody else who might have seen it or have been involved in it. And we'll just keep this running list of all the times that the person is doing this. And the reason we do that is so then if that stalking survivor ever decided that they want to try to get a restraining order, which are actually called protection orders, or if they decide they want to report it to the police or the Title IX officer, they can bring this document with them and have evidence of all the different times this person is harassing them. And it will help us to reach that reasonable person standard and say, look at Title IX coordinator, I have a right to feel uncomfortable because the behavior that's happening would make a reasonable person feel uncomfortable. So it's kind of just to gather evidence and support to meet that really high standard of a reasonable person, okay? So a lot of times, general public in society doesn't really understand what sexual assault, stalking, and domestic violence look like. There are a ton of myths and stereotypes about these issues. So I want you to choose one of them, and I want you to type in one of the myths or misconceptions you've heard about them. So for example, who do they say is usually the perpetrator? Where do they say that these crimes happen? What do they say that the perpetrator looks like or is wearing? What sorts of questions might they ask the victim? Go ahead and send me any of those myths or misconceptions that y'all have heard. All right, even if you're still typing, totally fine, but we've got some responses. Oh my gosh, you all are awesome. First of all, that it's always the guy that's the perpetrator. I hear this all the time, that it's always the male perpetrator and the female victim, right? I hate that stereotype because first of all, I think it gives my field a really bad reputation. I think it makes people think that anyone who works with victims or survivors hates men and thinks all men are bad. And that couldn't be further from the truth, right? Most people are good people and they would never do these things. The other thing that I really hate about this, that a couple of you also said, was that this stereotype, that men are always the perpetrators and women are always the victims, it makes it even harder for male victims to come forward and to get the help that they need, right? It makes it even harder for men to get the support, to be believed, to have their perpetrators held accountable. And in reality, men have to give consent too. Men could be hurt by their partner or sexually assaulted or followed and stalked by somebody just as well as females could be, right? It could happen to anybody. And that's why if you'll think back to those definitions never have pronouns. They never say he or she or they, because anybody could be the perpetrator and anybody could be victimized or be the survivor, right? Red Panda also talked about there's this stereotype that people lie all the time. Yeah, even on the policy assignment on your Understanding Power-Based Violence course, I all the time am getting this question submitted or emailed to me about, well, what about when people lie? And to be honest, it's really rare for people to lie and to go to the police or to go to the Title IX coordinator and say, this person hurt me, and then later for us to find out that that wasn't true. In fact, the FBI statistic says that only 2 to 8% of the time, and most of those studies are more on that 2 to 5% of the time, are victims lying, which means 92 to 98% of the time, people are telling the truth. And that 2 to 8% is the same false report rate as any other violent crime. And it includes the victims or survivors who recant, which is when you go and report it and then halfway through you say, you know what, I want to withdraw my complaint. I don't want to go forward with this anymore, which sometimes people do just because it's too overwhelming, not because it wasn't true, but because they can't go forward with that process anymore. It's too draining. So absolutely, Red Panda, that's a huge stereotype. And it's a really damaging one. It makes people feel like they're not going to be believed, and it makes us as a society do a bad job at supporting survivors. More of you are saying that one. Absolutely, that it's always this male. So there's a stereotype that it's this stranger danger, that a stranger is the one who jumps out of the bushes and sexually assaults you, or it's a stranger who's wearing the, trench coat and the binoculars and is hiding in the bushes, who's the stalker, when in reality, power-based violence is usually committed by somebody that the victim knows and somebody that they trust, right? It's not usually that stranger. Absolutely. So y'all did a really good job talking about these different stereotypes. So I think you hit almost all of the ones that I compiled on my list. I think there's a couple that I want to circle back to. One of them that I hear all the time, especially when it comes to domestic violence, is, well, if the abuse was so bad, why didn't the victim just leave, right? In reality, there's a million reasons that somebody might not leave an abusive partner. So will y'all go ahead and type in, should let you type. Don't write everything you remember from the homework, because I don't know what your homework was, but instead write in a reason that you can think of that somebody might not leave an abusive relationship. So why might somebody stay in a relationship even if that person is hurting them? And even if you're still typing, that's okay. We're going to look at what some of your classmates have said. It's a long-term relationship. They don't want to lose it. Absolutely. I've seen that all the time where people, especially because domestic violence usually starts really good in the beginning, right? Like that relationship might have been amazing in the beginning. So I've worked with a lot of people who are like, I just want to get back to like it was when we first got together, because things were so good when we first got together. Fear, absolutely. They might be afraid to leave. financially dependent. They might feel guilty. Yeah, they might have been told that everything is their fault. And after a while, you might start to believe that, right? Attachment, or they're dependent on the person. They've been brainwashed by the person. They're dependent on them. They have kids together. Yeah, absolutely. They're feeling trapped. Y'all are doing a great job. There's a million reasons. Look at all the ones you all came up with in like 2 seconds flat of why people might not leave. So in reality, that's a really victim blaming question. And it makes it sound like it's their fault that the abuse happened because they didn't leave. When in reality, it's that abuser's fault because the abuser is choosing to hurt their partner. And so I hate that question, and I'd much rather us as a society never ask that question again, and instead say, like, how can we support you? How can I help you? I'm so glad you told me, right? The other thing that I think a couple people I noticed typed in, but something I'll hear a lot, especially when it comes to sexual assault, is I'll hear a lot of victim blaming, where survivors of sexual assault are asked questions like, well, what were you wearing? What were you drinking? Why'd you go to that party? Why'd you go upstairs with that person? They're asked all these different questions that make it sound like they did something wrong and it's their fault that they got sexually assaulted. But again, it's not their fault. It's the perpetrator's fault. It's the person who chose to break the law and sexually assault somebody else. So something that I'll talk a lot about with folks is this difference between judgment and responsibility. It is probably not great judgment to walk down Dixie Avenue naked. It's just probably not, right? It's probably not a great idea. That being said, it's not your responsibility if someone else chooses to break the law and sexually assault you in that state, right? So yeah, probably not great judgment to go to a party and be blackout drunk and not know anybody and not have a safe person watching out for you. It's probably just not the safest idea, but it's still not your responsibility for someone else who has chosen to hurt you when you're in that state. Okay, a good person wouldn't hurt you in that state. They'd get you water, ibuprofen, food. They'd help you find your friends and get home safe, not take advantage of you. So as a society, we've got a lot of work to do. Most people don't understand what these issues are and what they look like, and they don't understand how to support somebody who's been through them. So what we know about power-based violence is that it happens on a continuum. This is the same slide from the PowerPoints on iLearn. So if you haven't gotten through all of them yet, this will look really familiar when you do. But what we know really is that the way we think influences the way we speak, and the way we speak influences the way we behave. So if we want to stop power-based violence from happening, we really need to intersect and interrupt every part of this continuum. So that means the things we need to do are the things that are on the slide in orange, okay? First and foremost, it means we need to support the survivors we've already got in our society. Statistically speaking, domestic violence alone impacts 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men in their lifetime. That is a lot of people who are being hurt in intimate relationships. So we got to support those folks and help them get resources. But the next thing we need to do is be an active bystander and intervene when we see these situations happening to watch out for each other and keep each other safe. The things you all can start doing today, even if you don't know any survivors or if you don't see any dangerous situations, the things we can all start doing today are 3 and 4. We can become better educated. We can learn about these systems of violence and how our society creates this system, even in the words we use, how if we'll use words that demean entire groups of people, then it makes it seem like some people in our society are better than other people. And that's a problem, because then when these people who are in this marginalized group are treated badly, we as a society aren't taking it seriously enough, okay? So we can start watching our own language and making sure we're not making rape jokes, we're not using words that dehumanize people or marginalize entire groups of people or minimize and trivialize violence. We can make sure we're not saying those victim blaming things, and we can call out our friends if we hear them saying those sorts of things and use it as an opportunity to educate them. And then we can go even further up this continuum and start to learn, where did those attitudes come from in the first place? How was I taught by society that, victims lie about this all the time? And if I was taught that false thing, how can we correct it and make sure future generations aren't taught these same lies that we were taught, right? Lots of work to do. We're gonna kind of go in order and talk about some of these. But first and foremost, I think if you're gonna get one thing from today, this is the slide that I want you to listen to the most. And that's how to support somebody who's been through this. We did a campus climate survey in the spring, and we had over 500 students respond and fill out this like hour-long survey and give us a ton of amazing data. But what we found was most of the time when somebody was sexually assaulted while at Tennessee Tech, the person they told first was their best friend. Usually they told you all before they told me, before they told a faculty member, before they told a parent, before they told a counselor. They're telling their friends first. But usually their friends have no idea what the hell to say back, right? And so this slide is so important because throughout your life, you are probably going to know people who have experienced this sort of thing. So it is so important that we respond in an appropriate way to help them, because there's a lot of research that says that if somebody isn't treated well when they disclose, the odds are that they might never tell somebody else again and they might not get that help they need. So it's really important that we respond appropriately. So if your friend after class today comes up to you and they tell you that they've experienced power-based violence, first and foremost, I encourage you to start by believing them. This does not mean that you find the person who they say hurt them and beat the crap out of them. It doesn't, even though that's what I would want to do too. I would want to hurt somebody back, right? Instead, it means that you start from a place of non-judgment. It means that you don't ask those victim-blaming questions, and instead you stay really neutral and try not to sound and make it sound like you're blaming them for what happened. Then I'd recommend that you just listen. You shut up and you listen. And you let them tell you what they want to tell you, and you don't force them to tell you anything, okay? A lot of times people will want to ask a million questions, but that could be really overwhelming to your friend. So it's much better for you to just let them talk and not force them to tell you every detail, okay? Then I'd recommend that you give them choices. We talked about how power-based violence is all about power and control. Nobody wakes up in the morning and is like, wow, I hope I experience power-based violence today. I hope I get sexually assaulted, or I hope I get abused by my partner, or I hope I get stalked. Nobody chooses this, right? They have their choice taken away. So one of the things you can do to help is make sure they have control over their situation now. Let them make all of the choices, have all of the control. So it might be as simple as like, hey, do you want Coke or Pepsi, right? But it's a little choice that lets them have control over what they're having with lunch today. It also can be really overwhelming for you to let them know all the different choices they have. I don't know if y'all can think about like when you're really stressed or overwhelmed, it can be really hard to see like a big picture, right? We kind of get tunnel vision when we're stressed and overwhelmed. And so it can be helpful for you to say, hey, I'm wondering if you want to report this to the police, or if you want to seek medical attention, or if you want to get counseling, because they might not even recognize that those are options for them. And so for you to say that out loud might help them realize, oh, those are options. Maybe I'll choose one of those. But then I wouldn't recommend that you force them to do any of those things. I would give them the choices and then let them decide what they want to do, and maybe offer to go with them. Hey, do you want to tell your parents I can be with you and hold your hand while you call them? It helps them to feel supported if you're willing to be there with them throughout that journey. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, I recommend that you connect them to experts, because in an hour period or even through an iLearn course, I can't make you a trained counselor, right? Like people go through years of training to do that, but you could connect them to somebody who is. So it can be really helpful for you to connect them to professionals, okay? So let's see if the next slide. So if a friend after class were to come to you and tell you they've experienced this, go ahead and type in what are some resources that you could give them, or some professionals that you could connect them to. Okay. Even if you're still typing, that's okay. This resource here at Tech, yay, Ladybug, absolutely, Project Awaken, because we're confidential, right? So we're a good place to start because we don't have to tell anybody. So if they decide they don't want to do anything, they can just talk to us and then not have to talk to anyone else. That's okay. Hotlines, absolutely. The Counseling Center has a 24/7 hotline, which I love because for me at least, my friends and I, like I've never had a friend tell me this during, daylight. This is usually like a 3 a.m. conversation when we stayed up way too late and we're exhausted, and then they tell you like the secrets, and like tell you what they've been through. And so a hotline, if it's 24/7, then you could offer to call with them, literally, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you can get them connected to an expert right then. So that's awesome. Yeah, Project Awaken, absolutely. A counselor at Tech, we have free counseling for students at the Counseling Center, which is in the UC. And they're also doing telehealth these days so that if students don't feel safe going in person, they can still get counseling even if they don't want to go in person. Absolutely. Nicely done. A lot of times people won't say Project Awaken, but your class gets bonus points because you said us lots. Also, law enforcement or the Title IX office, those are really good resources. The Title IX office especially can be helpful if, like, let's say they have a class with the person who hurt them. The Title IX office can help get that class moved so that they won't have to see that person every day, okay? So absolutely, those are some great resources to connect them to. But instead, hopefully, we don't even have to support a friend through this because hopefully we can stop violence from happening in the first place by being active bystanders. So bystanders, just in general, is somebody who stands by and watches something happen, right? And usually somebody's a bystander for a lot of different reasons. There's a lot of barriers to intervene. But one of the biggest barriers is that somebody doesn't know what to do. So they'll watch something bad happen and kind of freeze up because they don't know how to help or what to do. So instead, we hope that folks will be active bystanders and choose to intervene. And so with Project Awaken, we use the 4D model. And this is really just like a way to help you remember different intervention techniques. Okay, so let's talk through a scenario to explain bystander intervention. So let's say that two of our friends are in a relationship. They started dating since we've gotten to Tech. And you're kind of worried about them because it doesn't seem like a good relationship. It seems like your one friend is constantly treating your friend Alex badly. And they're constantly, you know, demeaning Alex, they're controlling Alex. Like, you're really worried that Alex is being abused in this relationship. And so let's say you're all at Swoops one day and the abusive partner calls Alex stupid in front of all of you. So being direct in that situation might mean that you're like, hey, don't call Alex that, Alex isn't stupid. You're like super confrontational, you're super direct about it. I think I'm 8 feet tall. So for me, that one's super comfortable. But for some people, they're like, oh, heck no, I am not going to cause a big scene in front of my friend group. So maybe instead they would choose to distract. Maybe in that situation, maybe distracting is just like completely changing the subject. That way the focus is off of Alex and Alex has a minute to catch their breath, okay? Or maybe they would choose to delay and later one-on-one to check back in with Alex and say, hey, Alex, I heard your partner call you this the other day and it made me really uncomfortable. Are you okay? Then you're still intervening, you're still checking on your friend, but you're not doing it in this big way that everyone's gonna know, right? Lastly, the 4th D, delegate. In this situation, delegating might mean you get other friends who are in your friend group to also intervene with you. Maybe you delegate and have one friend go check on the abuser and be like, hey, what are you doing? Why are you treating Alex like this? I don't think that Alex, that you should treat your partner like that. And maybe you delegate for another friend who's super close to Alex to go talk to Alex and check on Alex and make sure they're doing okay, all right? So your turn. Let's say that you're at a party. You go to a party at some point throughout college, and while the party's going on, you see that one person at the party seems to be purposely feeding a ton of drinks to somebody else at the party. And that person that they're giving drinks to is like super intoxicated. They're slurring their words. They're having trouble walking. And you're like, really, this seems off to you. You're like, that person is definitely wasted. They cannot give their consent. This other person seems to be purposely getting them drunk. And then that person takes the really drunk person and tries to go take them away from their friend group to a different part, like upstairs or downstairs, away from everybody else. Go ahead and I'm going to have you type in a way you could intervene to help keep that person safe. What's something you could do to try to intervene in that situation and keep that person safe? Okay. I used this scenario with another 1020 class and they were like, parties, there's a pandemic. We couldn't go to a party right now. So that's true. Even if it's not right now, if in the future, once it's safe again to be around people without masks on, and then how could you intervene and keep folks safe? Let's see. Question the person taking advantage of the drunk person. Absolutely. So this person, Panda's like, I could be super direct and be like, hey, what are you doing? They're super drunk. This is not okay. Absolutely. You could go up and distract them. Absolutely. How? I've heard people say that maybe they're gonna just be like a third wheel and that will be their distraction. I've heard other people say that they're gonna go up and just start talking, yeah, and like start a conversation, good. I've heard other people say that they're gonna try to get that potential perpetrator away, like, hey, do you wanna go play this game in the other room? Or, hey, your car is getting towed, or your mom is outside, to try to get them away from the person, maybe, okay? You would try to get the intoxicated ladybug's like, I'm gonna get the intoxicated person away. So yeah, maybe like, hey, really intoxicated person, do you want a Taco Bell? Let's go get Taco Bell, right? And try to like find a safe person to drive to get them away from that situation and get them food, water, ibuprofen. Absolutely. Duck is also very comfortable being confrontational and is gonna be confrontational and direct. Tell both and be like non-confrontational about like, hey, what are you guys doing? This isn't a good idea. Confront, don't go to parties. Maybe Wolf, but I think throughout people's lives, a lot of people might be in a situation, even if you're not at a party, you might still see something like this. I mean, I've seen people not treat their partners well in the middle of public places. So even if you don't go to a party, you still might see something that makes you uncomfortable and still might have to intervene. One of the scenarios I've heard about from other classes in the past is I've heard people say that they're gonna delegate to resources. So they're gonna grab the party's host and say, hey, this is happening, can you help? Because maybe the host of the party is more comfortable to intervene and watch out. I've also heard other people delegate by saying, I'm gonna go grab the really drunk person's friends and say, hey, aren't you friends with that person? I'm worried about your friend, will you go check on them? That's a great one. I've heard people say, one of my favorites was somebody said, I'm gonna yell cops. I said, oh my gosh, you're gonna call the police? I was shocked, right? Because students don't usually tell me that. They were like, no, Jack, I'm not gonna call the police. I'm just gonna yell cops, because if you yell cops at a party, everyone scatters. So maybe even doing something like that as a distraction to try to break up the party. At the end of the day, you all have just come up with a million different, not a million, but like 20 different intervention techniques, right? In a matter of minutes. So you already have these skills. So now it's recognizing and trusting that gut feeling of, I think something's off here. This doesn't seem right. And then doing that in your head and brainstorming, how could I intervene in a way that's going to both keep me safe and try to help the person that I'm worried about, okay? At the end of the day though, there are a million different things you can do, so try something. Now the same thing is not going to work in every situation, but try to do something to watch out for each other. I mean, we are reaching 3,000 students through that iLearn course that you all are taking. So even if each of us just intervened in one scenario this semester, that is 3,000 times that we have made our campus more safe. So nobody has to do everything. You don't have to put on a cape and save every single person in every single situation. But if we each just start watching the people around us and intervening, even if we all just did one thing, we've just helped 3,000 times, right? So nobody has to do everything, but everybody's got to do something, okay? So as we're ending, I want to thank y'all for your cooperation and participation today. I love this Pear Deck tool because I know I hate coming off of mute when I'm in a class. And so I think it's a good way for us to talk to each other without you all having to talk on camera. But I would encourage you to keep on staying with this content, to get involved with Project Awaken, to follow on social media, to use college to learn and grow and to learn about these things. Because I'm telling you, even as engineers, you're gonna see this stuff. You're gonna know people throughout your life, both in your work or your professional life, who've gone through it. So it's really important that you're staying engaged and that we all are supporting the people around us, okay? So I'm gonna put my email in the chat so that if folks have questions or need support, you can reach out to me privately, because I know a lot of people don't like asking questions through this format. You can also email awaken@tentech.edu, and that goes right to me, so that if you don't want to spell my last name, you can still get help without trying to spell my crazy last name. But thank you so much. Do you have things for them?
No, that's it. Thanks for doing a great job. And I guess I'll see you again in 40 minutes or 35 minutes. What do you?
Yeah, perfect.
All right, thanks
So much, y'all.